My name is Stacy Smith. My agency, SKS Consulting, was hired by the district to help to facilitate the community engagement piece of the middle school enrollment policy review. We will be joined shortly by Mr. Francisco Martinez, the admissions manager for the district. Tonight, we will be covering the background and history of the review. We will be discussing what current enrollment looks like, what the current enrollment policy looks like, and then we're going to dig into the different alternatives the district is considering right now as it looks at the middle school enrollment policy. So our agenda for this evening, as I said, we're going to go over the history and background. We're going to, and then we're going to check in. We're going to take time for questions about what we've reviewed so far. After we review the current alternatives being considered, we're going to be taking your questions and comments about those alternatives. We also want to hear from you whether or not you have other ideas of alternatives that might also be good, good solutions to some of the issues the district is looking at around the current policy. And then we're going to take a quick poll. They'll take just a minute, and then we'll close the meeting. We'll be here together for an hour, slightly more than an hour. So please, please feel free to stretch, get up, move around. So before we dig in too far, what I'd like to do is find out who is here with us this evening. If you could please, if you have a smartphone, please hold it up to this QR code. There are a few questions. It should take you a minute or two to answer them about who you are and who your student is. And for those of you who don't have a smartphone handy, I am trying to capture that link right now, and I'm going to put that in the chat. So if you prefer, you can follow the link that I have just posted in the chat. I'll give you just another minute. Okay. Thank you very much. So the main purpose of this town hall is to share information about the middle school policy review process and to gather your questions and comments. And because of that, the last half hour of this session will include live interaction. We will not be taking a break, so please do stretch. If you need to, get up, move around, get something to drink. We'll be here when you return. We will be pausing during the presentation so that you can ask questions of what we have already reviewed. Please do not raise your hand until we pause to take questions, although you may enter your questions into the Q&A at any time. And you should see along the bottom of your screen a little symbol or something that says Q&A. And if you click on that, that's where you can type your questions and comments. We want to hear from as many people as possible, so please limit those questions and comments to a minute or less as a courtesy to your fellow attendees. And if we have time, we will absolutely come back and take more questions. And if there's something that we do not get to this evening, please know that we are saving the Q&A transcript and that we will try to address any questions that you may have after the meeting, either in one of the next meetings or in communications that go out to the community. Let's start with the history and background of the middle school enrollment policy. In 1968, the Berkeley Unified School District became the first major public school system to voluntarily integrate its schools. Those of you who watched the Democratic presidential candidate debates probably heard our now Vice President Kamala Harris speak about being a student in Berkeley at that time. The commitment to a diverse and integrated school communities is a core district value. Berkeley believes that diverse integrated school communities enriches the educational experiences of other students It advances educational and occupational aspirations. It enhances critical thinking skills and facilitates the equitable distribution of resources. It reduces, prevents, or eliminates the effects of racial and social isolation, encourages positive relationships across racial and economic lines, by breaking the cycle of racial hostility, and it helps to foster a community of tolerance and appreciation of students from varied and diverse backgrounds. This in turn helps to promote participation in a pluralistic society. Let's talk a little bit about the district's current enrollment process. When considering school integration, the district focuses on 3 key socioeconomic factors: parent education, parent income, and race ethnicity. The map that you are looking at right now is something that the district calls enrollment, the Composite Diversity Map. This is the Composite Diversity Map that the district created based on current census data, and it reflects those 3 socioeconomic factors: parent income, race ethnicity, and parent education. This map is updated regularly when new census data is released. And so we just had a census not that long ago, and once that data is publicly released, this map will once again be updated by the district. The map is used as a tool to create elementary school zones. Let me tell you a little bit about what you're looking at. And this map, I'm going to ask you if you could hold it in your mind as we go through the next few slides and as we start to talk about some of the alternatives. This blue area, diversity category 3, is the Berkeley Hills. The purple area in the center, diversity category 2, is pretty much mid-Berkeley. And then here on the left and a little bit inward, we see diversity category 1, and that is West Berkeley and Flats. The purpose and goal of the map is to proportionally assign students to elementary schools so that they reflect the diversity of the city. So there are proportions in each school of blue, purple, and yellow. And all the elementary schools in an attendance zone will have a proportionate amount of each category and reflect the diversity of that zone. Now, this is the enrollment school map, the attendance zone map that the district uses for elementary schools. And I'm going to flip back so that you can do a comparison. Berkeley has taken the city, the district, and broken it into 3 enrollment zones. The red zone is considered the Northwest zone, and that's Jefferson, Thousand Oaks, Rosa Parks, and Berkeley Arts Magnet. The yellow zone, the central zone, is Berkeley Arts Magnet, Craigmont, Oxford, Washington, and Malcolm X. And then the green zone, the southeast zone down here in the lower right-hand corner, is Emerson, John Muir, and Malcolm X. I'd like to just note that Sylvia Mendez is also here in this zone, but Sylvia Mendez is considered a district-wide school. What you can see here in the center of the map, if you look closely, and I do want to mention that these maps are also up on the district's website. If you would like to take a look at them more closely and zoom in, this white line here separates out the King and Willard middle school zones. Let's take a look at that now. So here you can see, 2 enrollment zones for the middle schools. One is for King, the orange, and one is for Willard, the green. Berkeley also has another middle school called Longfellow. In 1994, when this map was created, there were only 2 schools. That's why there are only 2 zones. So the enrollment zones created for these schools are based on geographical factors, and they have not changed over time. In 1995, after this map was created, the district created a 3rd middle school, Longfellow. And Longfellow at the time was not assigned a zone. It was designated as a magnet or choice school. And to this day, families must choose to attend Longfellow or may be assigned in later rounds of the enrollment process. So the middle school enrollment policy has not been reviewed since 1994. And certainly in the 20 some odd years since then, demographics and enrollment trends have changed. Right now, Berkeley middle schools are segregated. None of the current middle schools reflect the racial and socioeconomic diversity that the district seeks to achieve in its schools. And it's not just one middle school that's impacted by this issue. All 3 middle schools are impacted by this issue. And the trend is expected to continue if things don't change, which is why the district is looking at this right now. So let me give you some examples of what the district is talking about when it says the schools are not integrated, they're not diverse. This is a chart put together by the admissions office, and it is middle school populations by race ethnicity. Just looking at the colors of this map, we can see that there's an imbalance here. In the chart shows an average of middle school populations for all 3 middle schools between 2018 and 2021. This is King over here on what is my left, Longfellow in the center, and Willard over here on the right-hand side. And the green represents students who are African American, the orange, Asian American students, the gray area, students who are Latinx, the yellow area, students who are multiracial, and the blue zone, students who are white. What we can see here in this chart is that these schools right now do not each reflect the diversity of Berkeley. And an example that Mr. Francisco Martinez, the admissions manager, likes to use is just looking at the blue zone, the white student population here in King. We can see that the population is 50%, whereas it is 19% for Longfellow and 48% for Willard. Now let's take a look at middle school population when we break it down by diversity category, those 3 categories we looked at in the map a moment ago. Here we see diversity category 1 is the yellow. Diversity category 2 is the purple. Remember, that was sort of central Berkeley. And then diversity category 3 is the blue, and that was sort of the Berkeley Hills. Once again, if we just look at the distribution of colors on these maps, we can see that there's no balance. That it's not balanced across the middle schools. And an example here is diversity category 1, yellow. It represents 37% of King, 71% of Longfellow, and 42% of Willard. Again, this is looking at middle school student populations averaged over 3 years from 2018 to 2021. So now here we are at a crossroads. We're here tonight together because in 2019, the board recognized the magnitude of this issue and the need to re-examine the policy. And the board directed the superintendent to review the middle school enrollment policy with community and staff input. The community engagement piece which we are taking part in tonight, is one of many pieces of this review. There are a lot of factors the district is looking at, including school diversity, future growth, distance from school, siblings, program quality, transportation, and then, of course, the important and critical community input. The review process was just recently extended by the Board of Directors through 2022. And so now this process, and then we will have many more of these meetings and many more activities where you can ask questions and provide input. And the board is expected to take the superintendent's recommendations and make any changes, if there are any changes, in fall of 2022. Those changes, if they are made, will take place in the 2023-2024 school year. And here's the timeline. So in spring of this year, we started the community engagement process. We kicked off the process. Some of you may have participated in a survey that we put out in June. We held 2 town halls, informational town halls primarily, just to let everybody know what was happening. And now here we are in fall, and we have, this is one of several town halls that we're doing. There are plans for a survey and focus groups. We've been reaching out to educators and principals. And then this kind of activity and outreach will continue through into spring and part of fall 2022. And here in November of 22, at the latest, the superintendent will bring his recommendation to the board, and the board will need to make a decision. And that decision may be to keep the current policy in place. All of this is being considered. Throughout this process, the district is holding open a space for community input and ideas about other alternatives that may not be considered, that the district may not have thought of, that are also good alternatives for the district to be reviewing. And so no decision has been made about any of the alternatives currently under review, and there will be a space held for your ideas throughout the entire process. Just briefly, before we take a break and then dive into the current alternatives, we just wanted to share that the community confirmed once again in June that having diverse integrated school communities is a key value. The June 2021 middle school enrollment policy survey I just mentioned was sent out to TK through rising 8th grade families. We had 1,928 responses. We asked folks which of the current alternatives under review they preferred. And 66% chose an enrollment policy that created more diverse school communities. And when I say alternatives, I mean alternative policies. 20% wanted to leave the current policy in place, and 14% were undecided. Again, this is just a snapshot of a moment in time, and we are going to continue to ask these questions over time. And this is time for us to check in. So what I'd like to do is ask you to please raise your hand, or I see we have something in the Q&A. See if we have, if we can answer any questions for you about what we have already covered. And I believe that perhaps Mr. Martinez has just joined us. I don't see him. Well, we'll give him a moment. As I said before, Mr. Francisco Martinez should be joining us any moment for the remainder of this presentation. Please do. Okay, I see we have a hand and we have a question. So I'm going to take the question. Oh, okay. I'm going to see he's having a little trouble logging in. So I'm going to take the question from Yura Tamano first. Could you define the diversity categories? Is this socioeconomic and parent education? Thank you, Yuri, for that question. excuse me, the diversity categories are parent education, parent income, and race ethnicity. And then we have a question from Laura Rivas. Just one moment. I am trying to unmute you so that you can answer. Oh, here we go. Okay, Ms. Rivas, you are unmuted. What can we?
Hi.
Hi, how are you this evening? Thank you for coming out.
Good, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Smith. So yeah, thank you for presenting that information. I have a comment and a question. Something that I wanted to say is, as a former BUSD employee, I spent 8 years working in the Office of Family Engagement and witnessed the challenges of students of color face in elementary school. And I just wanted to say that, diversity does not equal integration or inclusion in our schools. And I feel like this is a bigger issue that our community has yet to address. How are we going to support students across the board, right? Like to feel truly included in every single classroom, and that our families are really feeling that there is integration across race and class in all of our schools. That's one thing I just wanted to point out, because my concern with this policy potential change is that we're looking at, if the goal is just diversity, right, to diversify all of the schools, then we have to look at also what does that feel like for students in those schools, and what is the access like for families. So the question I had was around access. How are we going to ensure that particularly families of color and particularly low-income families, and these are not two like the same communities always, right? How are we going to ensure that they're able to access school, because transportation is not provided? And I'm already hearing rumors about a bus that's going to be an express bus that might be going down from the hills into the flatlands, but are we actually providing that for families living in the flatlands to access middle school, if we are in fact going to consider a change?
Thank you for the comment and the question. We have what I can tell you, what I can tell you is that the superintendent is already looking at transportation. There have not been any decisions that have been made, but it is something that is being explored.
Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like we might have another. Do we have another Q&A? No. Do we have any other questions right now before we continue? Okay, great. Thank you. I'm just going to take a quick moment and check in, because we are having some trouble getting Mr. Martinez into the town hall. So if everyone could just take one moment, be patient with me. Jessica, are you there?
I am. He's having some issues. I'm sorry, everyone. Francisco's having some issues trying to log in, so I'm trying to help him figure that out. So I really appreciate your patience with us.
Okay. Well, let's do this then. Why don't we get started and move on? And we're a very small group this evening, so I'm just wondering if everybody would like to join the meeting as a panelist, and then we could have more of a conversation.
I'll go ahead and start promoting everyone while we wait for Francisco.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, and meanwhile, I see that we have another question, a follow-up question from Laura Rivas. When will your question be addressed? throughout this process, which is going to carry into 2022, as I mentioned, there will be more information. And so when there is an answer, you will be hearing from it. There are many ways that we are sharing information about the community engagement process. That includes meetings like this. We have a dedicated section on the BUSD website. If you go to the main page, there's a quick link there. We have the slides and maps posted on there that we're going to go over this evening. We have meeting dates. We have the survey report from June. And as we have additional information about things like transportation and other review factors, those will also be posted and shared with the community. Okay, and Mr. Martinez requested a link. So Jessica, can you do that for him?
Yeah, I've sent it to him so many times already. I'm trying.
Okay.
I'm so sorry, guys.
That's fine. That's fine. Why don't we just move on then?
Can I make another comment? Is it okay, or do I need to?
No, it's totally fine. There's just us here this evening.
Okay. I appreciate you, reflecting back what I was asking, and I guess I'm not sure what to expect out of this particular space, but I'm also concerned about the outreach strategy, because as you can see, not a lot of families are here. And I hear the information's posted on the website. I hear that it's all available, but that's all kind of like the district is expecting families to go there to get all this information. And I worry that families in my community may not understand what this is going to mean for their children, because we're using this language, right? Enrollment policy, like it doesn't connect in a lot of people's minds what that actually is going to mean day to day and in the lives of their kids. And so I really want to see like a grassroots, very like down to earth approach to this issue, because the way it is framed right now, it's very like high level, like academic language. It's like, I have a master's degree and I can understand that, but not everybody in my community does. And I think that to really have an equitable process and to really hear people's voices, we need to go to where people are and really hear from those families that are going to be the most impacted, which I believe to be. And I think if we're really about equity and diversity, we know that the families that are going to face the biggest barriers are going to be our families of color, our low-income families, our English language learner, and immigrant community families. So we have to put them front and center. Otherwise, I don't know what we would be doing if we would be going up against our own values.
I also appreciate that comment. And I do want to say that one of the things, now that the board has extended the timeline, and I agree, it's a big challenge and it's something that I think about a lot. Since the board has extended the timeline for us to do the community engagement piece, that is something that we're going to be looking at really carefully as we plan, the remainder of this process. And so as we move into particularly spring 2022, we're going to be looking at ways to do just that. How do we go to folks? How do we work with others to reach those who are hard to reach? We've already reached out to OFEE. We've reached out to the principals, and we'll be looking at extended learning. We'll be trying to figure out who should we be speaking with and what, how do we do that most effectively? Because you're right, we need to be able to try to meet everybody. I'm going to take one or two questions before we move into, Claudia, I see you had a hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering, thinking the point that Laura said. So I have a kid at Laura's school, Sylvia Mendez, and one who graduated from there, and one in middle school. And I live in the Longfellow neighborhood. I live on a block that's about 50% Black people, and I've lived in Berkeley since 1994. So like I've been here a long time, and I'm a native Spanish speaker. I'm not low income, anymore. I had the privilege of going to good schools here, and it's been great, right? It worked for me, it doesn't work for everybody. But I want to say is like, we did, just to say who I am, right? So you know who I am. We did have like a consultant come to Sylvia Mendez. Remember that, Laura? And we had a lot of people attend. there were a lot of native Spanish speakers there. And hopefully I would hope that that information would be included as one of the points that was there. We did like a lot of writing on the board. And I've also really been talking with my neighbors in my neighborhood. So I will just speak from anecdotally. So the Black families on my block, they do not attend public school, any of them. They all attend private school because they don't feel like the options are suitable. Well, they feel like they have better options for their families. And they have been given a lot of scholarship to attend. There's a lot of private schools in Berkeley. But they are interested when I ask them, you know, they don't go to these meetings, but I'm speaking of like 4 families directly who have school age kids in the school in our neighborhood being one that they would consider sending their kids to, which they have not so far. So it's just sort of interesting. I guess it's just something I want to say, coming from this neighborhood and feeling like, I think my other big question is we're like, well, we know our neighborhood and we're wondering, one of the questions we want to know is how many of the kids who are at Longfellow now are from the Longfellow neighborhood? Like what percentage are from out of district? What percentage are from other neighbor? Like if you were to look at the zones, what percentage are from the South Berkeley zone?
That was
a lot of things there.
But that's why we're here this evening. It's so that we can spend time and hear your questions. And good evening, Mr. Martinez, the admissions manager of Berkeley, has made it into the webinar. So Claudia, what I hear from you is a few things, and I just want to try to reflect that back, because one of my jobs is to capture the input from the community and make sure that it's elevated and raised to the superintendent, you know, and the board when all this, you know, is reported and summarized, and there'll be interim reports as well. So I hear that you in your neighborhood, there are a lot of folks who are not going to the local schools, that you're interested in learning about who is going to each middle school, and you know, Longfellow, but perhaps other schools, and that you're looking for additional information. Was there something else in there, anything else in there that I missed?
The other thing was that we had some workshops, and one I thought was a really good format because it came into Sylvia Mendez and it was multilingual. I think there was a multilingual, but it was in the school where we're used to going. And I was wondering if that information would be fed into this process.
I will need to get back to you about that, but I do know that there are reports. I've seen some of those reports, and I know that the district is considering a lot of this information as well. And I think we have Director Vasudeo. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. I just wanted to lift up the great comments that both Claudia and Laura are making. And sorry, my house is very noisy right now because my children are right behind me. But just that I think, you know, for what works best for our communities, like, and I love what Claudia is proposing, but it's also really hard because of the pandemic and all the new protocols at schools to be able to have a physical workshop, but at least some kind of paper-based communications, particularly at Sylvia Mendez, particularly at Longfellow. And I know that there's an upcoming meeting, I think, right, Ms. Smith, for our English language learners, and I'd be curious to see what kind of paper-based outreach has been done, and also how we're engaging our ELAC and DLAC committees to make sure that those parents are aware and know kind of what's at stake. Because I think we'd get more voices than we see here tonight if we didn't, you know, more kind of paper-based outreach and really were intentional about reaching out to those committees.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Director Vasudeo. Just in terms of outreach, just so you know, the DLAC and ELAC committees don't seem to have a meeting date yet, although we are working with Lisa, who the district person who's staffing those meetings. And we've reached out to Latinos Unidos, and we have been generating flyers. There have been flyers, I believe, given out at meal distribution sites. And we have been talking about paper and maybe even just QR codes at each school site. So I appreciate that feedback. And as we go through the evening, the Q&A is for questions and also comments. So if others have ideas that you know, I mean, we have experts in the room that work particularly well for you, have worked well in the past, or that you want us to consider as we develop activities for the next round of engagement activities for spring 2022, please share. Please share. And at this time, I just want to move on. We have Director Martinez here this evening. And he is just in time to lead us into the next segment of our town hall this evening. And that is an overview of the current policy alternatives being considered by the district. Good evening, Mr. Martinez.
Hello, Anna. There's so few of you guys here, so I can say hello, Anna and Claudia and Laura and Stacy.
Hi, Bessie.
Okay, how are you guys? Sorry I was late. I had to go to get physical therapy, so I'm sorry I'm a little later. Then I was having trouble getting in. So, but here I am. So I don't know where you guys are, so I'll try to be as coherent as I can. So.
Well, we've gone over the diversity maps.
Okay.
We've gone over we basically have gone over the first section. This is our pausing to take a break over what we've already reviewed.
Okay.
And so we were about to jump into the next section. Laura, I'm so sorry I mispronounced your name before, and you have a hand up again. How about one more question or comment, and then let's move on. And remember, we're saving a whole bunch of time at the end for additional questions and comments.
Okay, sorry, I just didn't want to forget this one.
No worries.
I also was thinking about like the culturally responsive programs that are at Longfellow, such as Umoja and the TWI program, and there's a newcomer program at King, right? There's different programs at the schools, and so my question is, and it's a concern too, is how are we going to ensure that these culturally responsive programs are available then at all 3 middle schools equitably? And because right now they're not, there are programs at different schools that are specialized and including even, sports and things. I mean, there's sports, but I feel like if we just look at all of the things that draw families to specific schools and what it is that they're looking for at that school.
Right. I again appreciate that question. And I will say that is a question really for the Superintendent Stevens and his team. In addition to looking at transportation, I am aware that the superintendent has started to look at more closely at programming with his team. And again, as more information is available, part of my job is to make sure that you get it. And so when that is available, I will make sure that you get that information as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's jump back in and let's jump back in. Mr. Martinez, would you like to take us through the current middle school enrollment policy alternatives?
So, right now, like there's 3 alternatives that are being considered. The first one is basically, do nothing and keep the same assignment policy that we have in place. And what that means is that the schools will now be diverse, as there was a couple of graphs that you were shown in 2 different colors on how the schools are not diverse racially or socioeconomically. So if nothing changes, that pattern of segregation will continue, and that will be, that's one approach. Can you move on to the next slide, please? And so, like Stacy said, right now, one of the things that there's no transportation to middle school students. At this stage, we're exploring the possibility of what transportation may look like if, if transportation were to be provided. And I'm going to be showing you and walking through some maps. But these are not final maps. These are drafts. This is the idea that we are presenting. And just so you get a sense of, because I'm going to be talking about different schools and how we're doing things, their school capacity at the 3 middle schools. And Longfellow, I'm going to start with a school like it can handle about 500 or so students. It's a very small school, and it was purposely was, well, not purposely, but it's just a small building with a small footprint. Willard can handle like about 700 or so students. Right now they have about 650. King has about 900, but in the past they had about like close to 1,000 students. So that's the capacity of the schools, and it plays in effect, and it affects any model that we do. So let's move to the next slide, please. Like I said before, like one of the things is keep this, the thing that we have in place, nothing changes, everything is the same, everybody knows what it, whether they're a king on the will or son. And this map, you saw it before. So what this map is, it shows the attendance zone for king, which is in the orange color, and then for Willard, that is in the green. Longfellow is in Southwest Berkeley, and it doesn't have an attendance zone. So as you know, the attendance zones haven't been changed since 1994. Those were that's when the zones were made, and that was because before that we used to have what it was called junior, like junior, like middle junior highs. And that and they used to have 7 and 8 grades, but once we expanded to like 6, 7, and 8 for middle school, there was necessity to create one more middle school, and that's how Longfellow came into being in 1995 when the reconfiguration happened. Like I said before, one of the things that is that one of the pros on this is that everybody knows what the attendance zones look like. They had been in existence, like I said, since 1994, so it's a very long time. But one of the cons is the imbalances that you were shown before, they will continue in the schools, and if nothing is done. Next, please. So another approach that had been looked at and has been discussed is whether an attendance zone for Longfellow should be created. And so one of the things that you have seen in throughout these maps is that the attendance zones, they run from the flats to the hills, or from the hills to the flat, however you want to look at it. And in here, you see the attendance zone for of what would be King, and an attendance zone for Longfellow, and an attendance zone for Willard. In the previous map, like when you were looking at elementary schools, you saw that all of the North Zone is in the King Zone. So in this map, you basically see the same thing, that all of the King Zone remains in the King Zone, but what is the Central Zone? And you can see where the Central Zone is, because there's 2 white lines that tell you what the middle school, the Central Zone is. Some people have said, why don't you just create in like the whole attendance zone be for Longfellow? Longfellow does not have the building capacity to accommodate all of the kids that live in the Central Zone. It's just not possible. Like the only way to build the school in order to accomplish that, it will be to be built up. Because as you know, like anybody who has gone to Longfellow, the yard is small. So like in taking that, then the students wouldn't have any areas outside of the classrooms. So under this scenario, what the green zone, which would be new, is that it would be created for Longfellow. In those little squares, like that you see there, we call those in the district planning areas. That is something that the district created many years ago. They're called planning areas, and they were done in order to break down the city into manageable populations. And inside the little squares, by the way, like each of the little squares is between 4 to 6 city blocks. And you can see like around Malcolm X, they're much smaller. And you would say like, why are there some like up in the hills, they're so large, and at the bottom, they're so small? It's because the area around Malcolm X is the most densely populated area in Berkeley. And that's because there's a lot of apartments in that area. And so, but in each of the little cells, there's a tiny little number in there. We did it so like to find, just so we can visualize it. What does it look like? And there's a number in there, and that tells us how many kids are in the 5th grade right now in those areas. So they're through, like I said, if you look at there, I can see one around Malcolm X that has like 10 kids, and whereas there's some up in the hills where we don't see anything in there. There's no kids in the 5th grade right now. One of the things that we assume under this model is that Sylvia Mendez would continue to be a feeder school into Longfellow, because that's where normally, the kids have gone. And so like we did, I assume that they would be going into the same school. And so when we created the attendance zone, we made it in a sense that it would be small enough, the attendance zone, to accommodate the kids that would be attending Sylvia Mendez, but live in what would be the King or the Willard zone. So right now, like I said, a goal of having like 115 kids to accommodate like about 60 or so kids that would be coming out of Sylvia Mendez at one point to come, for there to be like about 6 classes at this school. We also talked about, we have discussed about transportation under this model for the only for the kids that live in the green area, because this is a new, it would be a change in the policy, if you will. And it would be express bus. It would not be like an elementary school bus that goes into the neighborhood and trying to pick as many kids as it can. But this would be to try to move it as fast as we can and eliminate the bus stops. Is kids would walk into a designated bus stop, and then it would be like express bus. It just picks up at those places and it comes down. And we assume that maybe it would also be just like the 1.5-mile radius that we do for the elementary schools where we provide transportation. So this is still in the planning stages, but this, like it may shift a little bit. We're waiting for the since it was extended to 22, the decision by the board to November 22. Is that we're waiting to see if more census data comes about, so we can make much more finite changes to make sure that the school is the 3 middle schools, because we're not only talking about Longfellow, we're talking about the 3 middle schools, that the 3 middle schools are diverse and integrated. Next, please. So another model that we looked at is whether they should be a cluster of schools or what we call feeder schools into middle school. And in essence, they would work the same way that the two-way immersion now works for Longfellow. The only difference right now for Longfellow is that some students, because the two-way immersion program is a school, it's a choice program. Parents don't have to send their kids to Longfellow for the two-way immersion. Some families have chosen not to send their kids to that school. But under this scenario, as a feeder school model, though the kids that attend a given elementary school, they would be the ones that go into that middle school. One of the things, the benefits that people talk about this model is that it's families and cohorts of students staying together. They go from elementary into middle schools. And it looks very simple, very simplistic, but there are challenges to this. One is, we need to make sure that the math works, that the number of students that are going from an elementary school to middle school, that middle school, it will be able to hold all of those kids in that school. And it also is going to provide some transportation challenges that will be illustrated once I walk through some maps. So let's go to the next map. So this is a feeder school model for what King is. And here, again, we will show you in the little planning areas, there is a number of kids, and then the lighter color, kind of the yellow one, it tells you there's one, but then there's some that have like many more, like 9 or 7 kids, depending. So we just wanted to illustrate where the kids are that are in the 5th grade. So so in the, I was telling you, like the kids, that schools that we chose would be in this model, which is we chose Craigmont, Berkeley as Magnet, Jefferson, which is now Ruth Active, but some people like know it as Jefferson. So like we just we changed it to another map, so we have a Ruth Active in Thousand Oaks. As you can see, most of the kids, the majority of the kids will be coming in from what is the North Zone, or what, because that's where King is located. And some other kids will be coming from the Central Zone, which is from Craigmont, because Craigmont is in the Central Zone. And if you look at the Craigmont, you see that is in the Central Zone that the kids come from the hills and the flats. And that is due to the fact that when we assign kids to Craigmont at the elementary school level, we have kids from throughout the attendance zone. And that is true for any school in their given attendance zone. So you see in the Central Zone, there's some kids that live in the hills and some kids that live in the flats. And this, so this map looks very much similar to what the attendance zone for King is right now, with the but you also need to remember how when we were showing you the diversity categories and the racial diversity, that King was they had more white students and they had more students, fewer students from diversity category 1, which is in the flats, and the other two proportionally, the other two schools. So this is what King looks like. Let's move to the next one. And the next one, this is what is more challenging, because, and I'll show you Longfellow in a second. So we, the two schools that are in South Berkeley, in kind of like on the east part, is John Muir and Emerson. So those two schools, normally they fit into traditionally into Willard. So those kids, we assign them to them. But we also needed to find more students to be able to accommodate the kids that are coming in from elementary school. So we needed 2 more schools. And so we chose 2 of the schools that would be a little bit closer to Willard. In this case was Rosa Parks and Washington. But you can see under this model that kids are coming from every direction. Like they're from throughout Berkeley, because Rosa Parks is in the North Zone, but we didn't assign it to King. So when we did that, there are kids that live in the hills that would have to go traverse Berkeley to go to Willard, and also in the flats and around where Rosa Parks is located. And also kids, because we are also taking Washington, now we see that for Washington, we have a lot of kids that are coming in from the Central Zone that would be assigned to them. So for this, under this model, for, like I said, for King, it looks pretty simplistic, and I said like nothing much changes. But when we get to Willard, because we have to be thinking about the 3 middle schools, not 1 middle school, it looks in this manner, and it looks a little bit challenging, and it provides, like I said, transportation issues that would have to be resolved. So let's look at now the next one. So this is the last school that we look at as a feeder pattern model for Longfellow. So again, we started with Sylvia Mendez. So Sylvia Mendez, we assumed that they would continue to go to Longfellow, and then we gave her Malcolm X, and that because it was some affinity, like Malcolm X is an arts magnet kind of school, and Longfellow kind of was as well, and some of those kids go there. So we assigned that school to them. But we needed to get to that number like around like 160. So then we said like, so how are we going to get there? If we assign, let's say, for instance, if we were to assign Rosa Parks to this school, we would go over the limit of kids. We couldn't accommodate the kids. If we do Washington, it would be the same thing. If we chose Craigmont, it would be the same thing. So the only other school that would make the numbers work, and that's what I was telling you before, like knowing what the capacity of the school is so important. So like the only school that we could give it and to be able for the numbers to work, because when we're doing this in the area with 5th graders, which we think are going to be the 6th graders, but we need to think on the 3-year term, the kids are in middle school. So Oxford, which is the smallest school in the district at this time, would be the only school that would work for Longfellow. There isn't any other school that we could mathematically make it to fit into this, because one would think that 20 students, that is not a lot. But when you're talking about middle school kids, and you're talking about close to about 60 or something kids, you need an additional two or even three classrooms to accommodate that. And Longfellow, like I said, is a small school. So this, it looks a little bit, when you look at this, and you say, but people would say, but Francisco, it's like, why do you see so many kids coming in from the North Zone? If you were trying to do a feeder school, who are those kids? Since these kids, you need to remember that Sylvia Mendez is a district-wide school. So kids come from throughout the district. So a lot of the kids that are in the North Zone, those are kids that are in the two-way immersion program. And the same thing applies for some of the hills. But because Malcolm X is also a Central Zone school, of course, we're gonna see kids that are coming in from the hills that in this model would have to be assigned to Longfellow. So those are the three scenarios. Again, it was one, do nothing, the other one, create an attendance zone for Longfellow, or the last one is to create a feeder model where kids that attend an elementary school go to another school. Another alternative was, if once we go through this process, if somebody comes up with a better idea than what we had thought, then we can look at it. But at this time, like, no decisions have been made. We're still in the engagement process, and that's where we are going through all of this to make sure that that we can do this.
And as promised, here we are, time for additional questions and comments, and also any ideas that you may have for other policy alternatives that the district should be considering.
So let me answer, like Claudia asked the question, how many kids come from a Longfellow come from diversity category 3, which I'm assuming this is like the kids now. If it is now, it's 8% of the kids that are attend Longfellow come from diversity category 3, which is kind of like the Berkeley Hills.
And how many come from category 1?
71%.
And then my other question was, thank you. That's helpful.
Yep. So just to let you know, like, because you reviewed this before, so we did a 3-year data of like diversity categories at Longfellow, like, because I wanted to know, like, who's attending Longfellow, and for a Longfellow, like 71% of the kids that attend Longfellow come from diversity category 1, which is in the flats. A lot of we did something for the board a few years ago where I was looking at the kids who are unduplicated kids. And we presented a map to the board where, like, because we wanted to see where the kids that was like 3 years ago that attended Longfellow, where are they coming from? And what we found is that they come from around the neighborhood, like not all of them, by a large number, more than 60% come from around the neighborhood to Longfellow. And
so
what is category 1, Laura? Is category 1 is the flats. Kind of like category 2 is kind of the middle, and category 3 is in the hills.
And I'm sorry, Claudia, I want you to be able to ask her question, but I'm just wondering, I know there are just a few of us here, but maybe we can just raise our hands so that we're not talking on top of each other. But Claudia, you did want to finish that question. Go ahead. Oh, and you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, because I live in the neighborhood and my kids go to the Francis Albiers Community Center. So I know a lot of kids in the community. And so I wonder, can you tell me how many kids are from outside of Berkeley at that school?
Longfellow?
Yeah.
I don't know that number, Claudia, at the top of my head. I can tell you that we have kids from outside the district at the 3 middle schools. It's not only Longfellow. So if if I were to guess in a grade, like one grade, maybe like 20 kids if I were to guess in the 6th grade right now. Like that's my guess. But it's like I don't have a like, please don't hold me to that number. But we do assign kids, but we assign them to like some people only talk about Longfellow, but we assigned kids to the 3 middle schools that are out of district.
Thank you. I only asked because I don't see the kid at Francis Albier's, where it's an after-school program run by the city. It's very affordable. Affordable parents tend to use, parents looking for affordable solutions tend to use it. None of those kids are going to Longfellow. And then in my neighborhood as well, and I live right near Longfellow, none of the kids I only know, I'm trying to think who I know. The kids I do know are the ones coming from Sylvia Mendez, but not from the neighborhood. So I just, anecdote, Berkeley's not that big of a town. We all kind of know who each other are. So I'm wondering who the students are. But yeah, well, thank you for the answers.
Yeah.
Thank you, Claudia. And then I saw we had a couple of questions from Laura, and then I wanted to make sure that there are some folks who haven't raised their hands or put anything in the Q&A. I want to make sure you know, this is the time for your questions and comments as well. But Laura, you had two questions I see here about communication with the city planners to assess, has there been any communication with the city planners to assess the impact of an express bus?
So one of the things that we talked about having an express bus, it would be it would not be an AC transit, like when we thought about this, it would be like a school bus, like a school bus, just like we do the elementary schools. So that normally the city planners are not involved in any of that process, like they don't know our kids, they don't know anything. But I do know that the superintendent is establishing a working group or a committee that is going to be looking into the transport, like whether transportation issues, and under either whatever model we choose. So there's going to be discussed and studied.
And then there was another question in here about a clarification about what category, diversity category 1 is one more time.
So the district is divided in what we call, composite diversity categories. And those, like those composite diversity categories, like roughly, diversity category 1 roughly is a color that in the previous map you saw, and it was yellow. And so that is kind of like in the flats or in West Berkeley. And diversity category 2 was a purple color, and it's like mid Berkeley. And then diversity category 3, you saw it and it was in blue, in blue in the map of Berkeley, and that's diversity category 3, and that is normally like the hills. So roughly, like if you look at it geographically, that's where it is.
Thank you. And Mr. San Martin or Ms. Tamano, do you have any questions or comments about what we have covered so far? I want to make sure to hold a space open for those questions. If you raise your hand, I'll unmute you so that you can speak, or you can put something in the Q&A. Okay, well, the offer is open for the rest of our time together. Okay, I do not see any raised hands at the moment. So I'm wondering, as we're sitting here looking at these alternatives, there's a question about the express bus. Are there other questions that folks have about the alternatives or feedback, maybe something you like and something, something that you're not crazy about, you don't like about each of the alternatives? Laura?
I like the idea of the feeder schools, actually. I think that could be, I think that could work. And I think that, again, I think it's important to consider of course, how this gets communicated to families, right? Because families are drawn to certain schools for their culture, and even though they're all Berkeley schools and all Berkeley schools have all similar programs offered and everything, each school is unique in its own way. And so how is this going to be rolled out and, to get buy-in from the community to, because they're basically asking families to, once they, let's say they go to Oxford, then they're going to be assigned to Longfellow. That's going to be their middle school. So they will no longer have a choice, right? Or if they're attending elementary school in, I don't know, Washington, they all know that they're going to go to their assigned middle school. And then I think I asked this before already, but just in terms of long-term sustainability and funding, does this mean that resources, like for academic interventions and other programs and supports, will be then distributed equitably by the district, or how will that work? Like, in terms of like services for ELs, services for, and programming, culturally responsive programming for African-American students and for Latinos, the Puente program, all the different programs that are available at the different schools right now.
Right. And again, my understanding is that the superintendent has started to look at that more closely with the administration. That certainly is a question that has come up throughout, as we started this process. It's a question that's been asked. And I think that there's that time for the review. That's one of the factors that needs to be reviewed. And so I don't have an answer for you right now. Francisco, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
What I can tell you is that at the town halls, and especially in the one in Spanish, that was brought up, and also like at some schools. So the superintendent was there, so he has heard this. People talked about Emoja, Puente, those two programs. For instance, I believe that the EL program at King, I think it needs to remain there. That's my opinion, because it's a very small number of kids. We're not talking about that many kids. We're talking about a handful of kids that are in the King EL program. I think that program needs to remain there because it's small. You talked about one of the things that, like I said, is like the feeder school model. It looks like sometimes just on paper, like in just talking about that it works, but also I get questions from families, and sometimes they get upset with us because we cannot tell them where their kids are going to be going into an elementary school. So I ask them, so how old is your kid? And they tell me, well, I don't have a kid yet. We're planning our kid. Or they get upset because they, and I'm not making this up. I'm literally telling you this. And I'll get to my point in a second. I have other families who say, like, I need to know where my kid is going to be assigned. So I said, well, we have attendance zone. So tell me where do you live? And they say, I don't live in Berkeley. And so my point is that families sometimes, especially when it comes to their kids, and when they're coming into kindergarten and all of those things. I mean, our schools are very good. I believe that that all of the schools are very good. But families get I can see this happening, that they want to be assigned to the right elementary school, to be assigned to the right middle school. When you have feeder school, and the pressure is going to be there, with families that for instance, somebody who would say, I want to be assigned to, and I'm just going to choose Oxford because it's small and I can pick on them. They can say, I want to be assigned to Oxford because I want my kid to go to Longfellow. And the same will apply to many schools, where families are going to say they want to be assigned to that elementary school because they want to ensure that their kid is going to the right middle school. Just like I said, parents that get upset because we cannot tell them where the kid is going to be assigned because the kids haven't been born or they don't live in Berkeley. It's going to be the same thing with with the pressure in that. And having an attendance zone, right now we have an attendance zone for King and Willard, and families know that if they live kind of in that area, the chances are that they will be assigned. And sometimes we are not able to fulfill that when we don't have enough spaces. But for the vast majority of the time, kids do get into their school where they live.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I want to take your question or comment. I just want to also just say one thing that I hope is reassuring, which is a reminder that we are at a point in time here, and we don't have all the answers. But that's what this process is about. It's about raising the questions, taking the comments, taking your input that will help to inform those answers. And there will be answers. It's just that at this point of time, we don't have answers for all of these questions. But when we do, we will get those out to you. Go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Stacy, because I think this is so important to kind of see the common threads and themes and see, what we have to address before this actually goes into before a vote or for implementation. It's informative for me just to hear the discussion. I was gonna say for Francisco, something that you said really stuck to me is that the newcomer program has to stay at King, right? Like there's certain things that you can already tell, like they're just gonna work better this way. Do you think that there has to be like a change in policy then for how we serve English language learners? Like, how do we make sure that every single EL gets, directed to that program if they are like true newcomers, right? Like do you think we need to do behind the scenes on the implementation side, right? Like fast forward, like what can we do better to make sure that we're supporting the EL students better?
So like right now is, and I tell you what, right now is kind of challenging because we don't have staff in state and federal programs. And, like for instance, I have to like assign a kid and I assigned the kid to the EL program at the school. It was coming from outside the country, but we need to have the assessment tools to assess the kids before we assign them. And it's the same thing for the two-way immersion. Like I need those tools. And by that, it's like not me, but there has to be somebody who assesses them and they tell me what the level of the kid is. And then we assign them. I normally I work with Gloria Munoz or whoever is in that position, which I need to depend on for them to tell me the level of the kids, because many times the assessment is done in October. And so like I don't know how many, how much if it needs to be done by October, I don't know how much kids have progressed and basically in 8 months, so or 9 months. So that there needs to be more in the EL master plan, because it's being developed right now, is that component, like the identification of true EL kids, needs to be done so that when the kids are assigned, we assign them, they go there. But it is not, we don't have in the district, if a kid goes through our elementary schools from kindergarten to the 5th grade, we should not be discussing the issue, which is something like that a kid needs to be going into the EL program at the King. I mean, that should never happen in the first place. Because kids need to be, they should be speaking English, but when they have been in our system for 6 years. So like, and that's what I said, like the number of kids that come into the program is small. And for me, it's a very small program. Sometimes there's like about 6-8 kids and like, so it's kind of small. I think you've been to that class, so it's pretty small. So like, to like send 2 kids when the class is, let's say, it's like 6 to 8 kids, to send them, it just for that program, I think it's better for them to be in one location so they can get the accelerated services that they need.
And thank you. And I'm gonna say, I feel like we're digressing just a little from the middle school enrollment policy alternatives, although it's all interrelated. So I appreciate this conversation. I'm going to do a time check right now. It's 7:16. Claudia, I see you have another question. I want to take it in a minute, but what I'd really like to do right now is something that we've been doing at all the town halls. And that is, we'd like you to take an anonymous poll. And what I'm going to do is we're going to do the poll, and then we're going to come right back to this conversation. Want to spend just a few minutes explaining what we're doing for the rest of the fall, and then continue. So let's see. So what we're asking everybody at these town halls is, based on what you know right now, do you have a preferred policy alternative? And we're asking you to rank your choices. So you can choose one option. If you only like one, you can choose 2 and up to 3. So the options are to expand the 3 enrollment zones, to create the elementary school feeder schools, to keep the current policy in place the way it is, that you're just not sure yet, or none of the above other. Maybe you have an alternative in mind that you'd like to share. So once again, what I'm going to do is here is a QR code that will take you to this poll. It's one question. I'm going to put the link into the chat as well. It's going to take just one moment. And while we're doing this, perhaps we can continue to, oops, that is not the link to the chat. Perhaps we can continue to take questions. In fact, why don't you take that question right now, Francisco?
Claudia, what is your question?
Oh, I guess it was just more of a comment. Looking at both those maps, I think they're interesting. I think what I will tell you is what's interesting about the zones is we've talked a lot about affinity groups. I'm sorry that Ana Basuero had to leave because she's listening. And when, you know, the neighborhoods we live in do sort us into our affinity groups, right? Like the southwest corner of Berkeley is where a lot of Black families live and have lived for a long time. You know, like the Latino families live in sort of southwest. So by going in the zones, you're going to be going, what I like about that is you're going to be going to school with people who have affinity with you, with your neighbors, where you've kind of self-sorted, right? Because that's why we have that's why we do the enrollment we have. And I think that would work nicely. But I also want to say, having just had a son go into middle school, this year was really for the first time because last year they were home. Lots of parents were like, my kid knows nobody because they get broken up between King and Willard and felt very alone, you know? So I can also see the value of the feeder schools. But I would say if I was speaking from affinity, separate from Sylvia Mendez, which has its own affinity, it's kind of its own thing, it seems like the zones would allow more of the students to stay with their affinity groups, you know, with people from their community and be able to recreate that. And I just hoping that like Ana would hear that, and I don't know, and maybe other parents here. I'm one of the people on the call who doesn't work for the district in some manner. So that's all.
And Claudia, I do agree with you in the fact that in the attendance zone, because sometimes, you know, like you said, if you have an attendance zone, you know, like those kids in that area who normally are the ones that the kids play with after school and different things, that they would be the ones that are going. And that's how, you know, like if some family decide that they want to carpool or something like that, it's like, you know, I see those things. And so, but yes, you can write to Ana and tell her your ideas. Claudia, I know you're not shy.
Thank you. We have a question in here about where the maps are for the middle school enrollment policy alternatives that we are reviewing right now. And I am trying to put a link in for the district's website. Here's a link to the space on the district's website. It's in the chat here, and I'm trying to put it in the Q&A. It's not letting me type into the Q&A, of course. So anyway, it is on the BUSD website, and that's where you can find that. Do we have any other questions for this evening? Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming and let you know that we are holding a few more of these town halls over the next 2 weeks. We have tomorrow night, we have a town hall for families of special education students. And next Wednesday, October 13th, we have a town hall for families of ELL students. And on Thursday, October 14th, we have a town hall for families of African-American students. And please let folks know about these if there are folks you know who should be joining us. And we will continue to do our other activities, focus groups, reaching out to the community, and we've really valued the feedback from this evening. Thank you so much. Okay, and it looks like the maps are there. Fantastic. Great. Does anybody have any other questions before we leave? Thank you so much for coming out with us this evening. Okay, thank you very much. Francisco, I'm just going to copy the chat and the Q&A real quick before before we close off. And I think that's it for us this evening. Okay, I'm going to close this webinar right now.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Let's see you.